So the background noise finally stops. You know the exact moment I'm talking about, right? The music pauses, the podcast ends, you finally put your phone face down, and suddenly there's this immediate striking void in the room. Think about the exact second you step away from a long scrolling session, or when a show fades to black. The room just feels completely different. It's totally still, sure, but it doesn't necessarily feel peaceful, does it? Actually, it kind of feels uncomfortably loud, just in its own unique way. The second those headphones come off, it's almost like you can feel the sound waves drifting away and dissolving. And what's left behind? It's this very specific, really heavy kind of silence. I mean, we're so incredibly used to having constant auditory company now. We've basically conditioned ourselves to need a soundtrack for everything, for walking, for working, and even for resting. So when all that audio just abruptly vanishes into the green, your mind is left, well, kind of suspended. It's actively searching for that rhythm, grasping for the input it's literally just lost. It just wants something to hold onto in the void. And it's wild, because when the noise stops, the physical space actually feels like it shifts. You suddenly notice the slow shift of a clock's digits, or that empty chair sitting right there under the dim lamp. The room inexplicably feels so much larger than it did 2 minutes ago. It's almost like the walls have literally pushed backward, expanding everything around you. And this is exactly where the discomfort hits. When we're not filling up the space with our own external audio, the sheer volume of an empty room becomes incredibly palpable. Every single tick of that slow wall clock feels magnified. It's a stark reminder that, yeah, you're entirely alone in this suddenly massive, quiet space. So, faced with that sudden emptiness, what do our minds do? They kind of panic. Imagine a tiny, singular flicker of light in a completely blank room. That flicker represents this deep, instinctual pull we have toward literally any form of external stimulation when we're faced with nothingness. There's actually this fascinating concept we're looking at here, this idea of a purely symbolic, completely blank room used in psychological shock studies. The friction of simply doing nothing is so intense for us nowadays that our minds will desperately reach for the smallest distraction, a tiny light, a notification ping, honestly, anything at all. We crave it just to avoid sitting alone with ourselves in the quiet. But why is simply sitting still so incredibly jarring? Well, it's because our average day usually looks more like a chaotic blur of overlapping layers. Think about your daily routine. It's packed with heavy layers of sound, rapid-fire headlines, an endless stream of messages, and just constant visual motion. Our brains have completely adapted to that high-speed, hyper-dense environment. So when you suddenly step out of all that and into a slower, flatter, quiet space, boom, it is jarring. It's like your brain is still revving at highway speeds while you're sitting in a parked car. That mismatch? That's exactly what creates that deep, restless sense of unease. Once you finally strip away all those heavy layers of daily input, a pretty vital question emerges. What rises in the quiet? Because as the external world fades out, your internal world gets way louder. Without the distractions, your own internal thoughts become so much easier to notice. It's kind of like shadows stretching across an unopened notebook under a soft light. All those thoughts, memories, and reflections that were getting completely drowned out by background noise, they start to stretch out. They demand your attention. And honestly, for a lot of people, suddenly hearing their own unfiltered thoughts is exactly what makes the silence feel so deeply uncomfortable. Because dealing with those unfiltered thoughts, it isn't passive at all. It's actual effort. Imagine a soft, rhythmic pulse of light glowing beneath a closed door in an otherwise dark hallway. That's what your brain is doing. It's continuous mental heavy lifting. When we sit in silence, we're literally forced to process, to reflect, to engage with ourselves. A lot of the time, we aren't reaching for our phones just because we're simply bored. No, we're subconsciously dodging the mental energy required to face whatever is actively churning behind that closed door. And you see this avoidance play out in the smallest, most mundane moments of our lives. Sitting at a red light, staring at a grocery receipt while waiting in line. In these tiny micro moments of downtime, what's your absolute first instinct? You grab your phone, right? Reflexively. We have developed this intense, almost automatic avoidance of boredom. In these little waiting spaces, instead of just letting our minds rest or wander, we desperately plug back into the stream of external input. We've essentially conditioned ourselves to completely eliminate every single second of empty space from our days, almost like we're terrified of what happens when we just wait. So eventually, when we do encounter quiet, we hit a crossroads. On one side, silence can feel like a gray, foggy clearing. It's a heavy, dreadful, isolating feeling. That's what happens when we simply don't know how to be alone with our thoughts. But on the other side of that split path, there's a warm, sunlit forest.
The thing is, if we can just learn to sit through that initial wave of discomfort, if we can just let the dust settle, silence actually transforms. It shifts from this scary, gaping void into a really peaceful experience of solitude. It becomes a restorative space where we can actually breathe and just be completely present.
And there is absolutely a way to navigate toward that sunlit path. It involves something researchers call soft fascination. Picture a slow-moving river or leaves just drifting on the water. There's no instructional text here, no demands on your attention, no jarring notification alerts. Soft fascination happens when you just allow your mind to gently observe something, clouds moving, shadows shifting, without any rigid focus or intense effort. It is literally the exact opposite of the constant, demanding input of our screens and daily lives. Allowing yourself to experience this restorative quiet gives your mind permission to truly rest and naturally replenish all that depleted energy. If we make a habit of practicing this, we can actually return to where we started, back to that rainy window, the calm lamp glow, the phone sitting face down. But we experience it entirely differently. Something fundamental in the atmosphere has shifted. Because you've walked through that initial discomfort, you've acknowledged the internal noise, and you've tapped into that soft fascination, the quiet doesn't feel heavy or tense anymore. The physical room, it hasn't changed at all, but your capacity to exist within it has. With the phone still face down, the quiet space suddenly feels deeply restorative and welcoming, rather than empty and overwhelming. So the very next time the music stops, or you find yourself with just 5 minutes of completely empty time, I want to challenge you to just pause. Look at the soft, quiet space around you and ask yourself the question fading in right now. Can you let the room be still? Notice that immediate, twitchy instinct to reach for a distraction and just gently let it pass. Can you sit through that initial jarring wave of discomfort? Can you let the room be completely still just for a moment and discover the restorative quiet that's waiting for you on the exact opposite side?